Ever bought something so cheap it felt like robbery, only to realize you were the one being sold? In the chaotic heart of the Lagos night market, a sharp-eyed trader snatches a heavy, blindingly golden lantern for just 1,000 naira. It's the bargain of a lifetime, until he realizes that every time he lights it, he is haunted through an endless nightmare by a faceless horror. The twist is, the longer he survives the chase in his sleep, the more his waking bank account explodes with cash. The Lagos night market at Alaba was a living, breathing beast of sweat, diesel smoke, and flashing counterfeit bulbs. Kalu loved it. To Kalu, every pile of discarded electronics, every rusted engine part, and every dusty box of forgotten goods was not junk, it was untapped capital waiting for a sharp eye. He prided himself on his hustle, his ability to spot value where other men saw only trash. It was past midnight when he found the old woman. She sat hunched on a woven mat at the very edge of the market, away from the blaring generators and the shouting hawkers. Around her were scattered broken plastic toys, faded wrappers, and a single item that caught the amber glow of a distant street lamp. It was a lantern. It was remarkably heavy, cast in a deep, lustrous brass that had been polished to a blinding, unnatural golden sheen. It looked untouched by the humid Lagos air, free from tarnish or rust, as if it had been forged only an hour ago. Kalu's merchant heart skipped a beat. He knew fine metal when he saw it. Scrap value alone would fetch a decent profit, but polished up and resold to a collector in Victoria Island, it could double his weekly capital in a single afternoon. "How much for this?" Kalu asked, his voice sharp and eager, leaning over her mat. The old woman did not look up immediately. Her dry, skeletal fingers traced the rim of the lantern's glass chimney. When she finally raised her head, her eyes were milky white, clouded with age or something much older. 1,000 naira, she whispered, her voice like dry leaves scraping across concrete. Kalu almost laughed out loud. It was robbery, a daylight highway robbery in the dead of night, in his favor. A brass piece of this weight and craftsmanship was worth 20 times that amount, even broken. He didn't even bother to bargain, terrified that she might realize her mistake. He slapped a crisp note into her wrinkled palm, snatched the golden lantern by its handle, and plunged back into the crowded chaos of the market, grinning from ear to ear. His room was a cramped box in a sprawling multi-tenant compound in Mushin. The walls were painted a dull, peeling cream, and the air always carried the faint scent of fried plantain oil and open gutters from the courtyard below. That night, the electricity was predictably out, plunging the compound into thick, suffocating darkness. Kalu sat on the edge of his thin foam mattress, feeling triumphant. He placed the golden lantern on his wooden bedside stool. Striking a match, he lifted the glass chimney and touched the flame to the wick. The wick caught instantly, casting a warm, buttery light across the cramped room. But the light was strange. It didn't flicker with the orange-red tint of ordinary kerosene. It burned with a pale golden luminescence that seemed to push the shadows into unnatural, rigid corners. The flame cast sharp, distorted silhouettes of his clothes hanging on the wall, making them look less like shirts and trousers and more like twisted, watching figures. Kalu smiled, warmed by his cleverness, and blew the flame out. The room plunged back into darkness. He undressed, climbed under his worn bed sheets, and closed his eyes, his mind racing with calculations of profit margins, market stalls, and tomorrow's trades. Sleep came quickly, heavy and dense. Then the dream began. Kalu was no longer in his room. He was running through a labyrinth of endless, suffocating concrete corridors that twisted and turned upon themselves like the intestines of a giant beast. The air here was ice cold, smelling faintly of rusted iron and wet earth, a sharp contrast to the humid heat of Lagos. Behind him, there was a sound. It was a rhythmic, heavy, dragging scrape, accompanied by a low, guttural breathing that vibrated deep inside Kalu's chest. Thump, drag, thump, drag.
Kalu looked back over his shoulder as he sprinted around a sharp corner. 50 yards down the corridor, emerging from the pitch blackness, was something wrong. It was tall, impossibly tall, wearing a tattered garment that shifted between the appearance of a modern business suit and ancient, dust-caked rags. It had no face, only a smooth, blank expanse of pale skin where features should have been, and it was walking with a relentless, terrifying speed, closing the distance between them with every breath Kalu took. Panic seized him. His legs felt like lead. His lungs burned as if he were inhaling fire, and the entity behind him grew larger in his mind's eye, its very presence radiating an intense, suffocating malice. He pushed harder, screaming into the empty, echoing corridors, running for his life from a nightmare that had no name and no reason. When Kalu bolted upright in his bed, the sun was already high, streaming through his small window and baking the corrugated iron roof above. He was drenched in a cold, shivering sweat. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird, and his legs ached as though he had genuinely sprinted for miles through the night. He sat there, clutching his chest, gasping for breath, trying to shake the lingering terror of the faceless thing in the corridor. "Just a bad dream," he muttered, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "Too much gari before bed, too much stress about the market." He got up, splashed cold water on his face from a plastic bucket, and rushed out to catch the morning transport to his spare parts stall at Ladipo. The morning was frantic, filled with the usual symphony of shouting touts, blaring horns, and customers haggling over alternators and brake pads. Yet, by noon, something extraordinary happened. A man Kalu had never seen before, a wealthy contractor from Abuja looking for rare heavy-duty truck parts, walked straight past 3 larger, better-stocked stalls and stopped directly in front of Kalu's modest display. Not only did the man buy every single item Kalu had been trying to clear out for months, but he paid in full, up front, and didn't even attempt to bargain down a single naira. By the time Kalu counted his cash at sunset, his daily profit had tripled. It was the kind of windfall that usually happened once a year. He laughed, attributing it to good luck and the erratic spirit of Lagos commerce. That night, returning to his room in Mushin, tired but flush with cash, Kalu noticed the golden lantern sitting on his stool. Remembering how it had illuminated the room the night before, and feeling a strange, inexplicable pull toward its polished surface, he lit it again before going to sleep. The golden light flared, beautiful and bright. Kalu smiled, blew it out, and went to bed. The dream returned instantly. He was back in the cold, echoing concrete labyrinth. He had barely taken 3 steps before he heard it behind him. Thump, drag, thump, drag. He turned his head and saw the faceless entity. It was closer than it had been the night before, much closer. The sound of its heavy breathing echoed off the walls like the ticking of a doomsday clock, and the sheer weight of its malice made Kalu's skin crawl. Kalu screamed and ran. He ran until his muscles tore, until his throat tasted of copper and salt, forcing himself to endure the terror, refusing to stop, refusing to let it catch him, until the blinding light of morning shattered the dream and dragged him back to the waking world.
His eyes snapped open. His chest was rising and falling so hard that it felt as though invisible hands were still squeezing the air from his lungs. His dead sheet was soaked through, and every muscle in his body protested as he swung his legs over the side of the mattress. The nightmare had ended with daylight, yet the terror lingered stubbornly in his bones. His calves burned, His shoulders ached. Even his palms stung as if he had scraped them against rough concrete while running. He stared at the golden lantern resting silently on the stool. It looked harmless, beautiful even. Nothing about its polished brass surface suggested that it had dragged him through hours of impossible terror. Kalu forced himself to laugh. A dream is a dream, no matter how real it feels. Yet his voice sounded uncertain. He splashed cold water on his face, dressed quickly and headed for Ladipo Market. The moment he arrived, something felt different. Customers were already waiting, not browsing, waiting specifically for him. Before he had unlocked his stall, a businessman dressed in an expensive navy kaftan stepped forward. "You are Kalu?" "Yes, I've been looking everywhere for you." The man produced a handwritten list of heavy-duty spare parts. He was told only you can supply these. Kalu frowned. Nobody had ever said that about him before. He almost admitted he didn't have everything on the list. Then he remembered an old wooden crate he had bought weeks earlier from a closing warehouse. It contained forgotten inventory he had never bothered sorting. He opened it. His heartbeat stopped. Every single item on the customer's list was inside. Not substitutes, not similar models, the exact parts. The businessman smiled. "I'll take all of them." He transferred the payment immediately. The amount made Kalu's knees weak. By midday, more buyers arrived. A transport company bought every remaining alternator. A mechanic paid triple for a gearbox Kalu had struggled to sell for months. Another trader insisted on paying in advance for future deliveries. It was impossible. No bargaining, no arguments, no delays. Money flowed towards Kalu as though the city itself had decided he deserved to become wealthy overnight. By evening, he sat quietly behind his stall, staring at the thick bundle of notes in his hands. Then he heard it. Thump, drag, thump, drag. The sound was faint, barely noticeable beneath the shouting traders and blaring horns. Kalu froze. He slowly looked behind him. Nothing. Only customers moving through the crowded market. A child laughed. Someone argued over prices. Life continued normally. He shook his head. I'm imagining things, but a cold knot tightened inside his stomach. On his way home, he stopped beside a roadside food vendor. While waiting for roasted plantain and fish, he caught his reflection in the vendor's polished aluminum pot. For the briefest moment, someone stood behind him. Tall, motionless, faceless. Kalu spun around so quickly that he almost knocked over the charcoal grill. Nobody. Only commuters pushing through the evening traffic. When he looked back into the pot, his reflection was alone. His appetite vanished. Back at the compound, sleep was the last thing on his mind. Instead of lighting the lantern, he wrapped it inside an old wrapper and shoved it beneath his bed. If I can't see it, I'll forget about it. He tried. He washed his clothes, he counted his money, he even attempted to watch an old Nollywood film playing in the neighbor's room. Nothing helped. His eyes kept drifting towards the space beneath the bed. Eventually, he crawled down and pulled the lantern out again. It felt strangely warm, not hot, just alive. Kalu frowned. That was impossible. The lantern hadn't been lit all day. He carefully examined every inch of it. No maker's mark, no serial number, no scratches except those made by years of handling. Then he noticed something he had missed before. Tiny symbols were carved beneath the handle. Not English, not Arabic, not any language he recognized. He photographed them with his phone and spent nearly an hour searching online. Nothing. Every search led nowhere. The symbols simply didn't exist. He considered taking the lantern back to Alaba. Perhaps the old woman knew something. The next morning, before business, he rushed to the exact corner where he had bought it. The old woman was gone. He asked nearby traders. Nobody remembered seeing her. One man laughed. "My brother, that corner has been empty for almost 2 months." Kalu insisted. There was an old woman here selling toys. The trader looked genuinely confused. "You must be mistaken." A chill crawled up Kalu's spine. Business exploded again that afternoon.
A distributor from Port Harcourt signed an agreement worth more money than Kalu had earned in the previous 2 years combined. His phone refused to stop ringing. Every opportunity he had prayed for suddenly arrived all at once. Yet, every blessing carried the weight of the previous night's nightmare. Every smile reminded him of the faceless thing. Every bank alert felt colder than the last. When darkness finally settled over Mushin, Kalu stood alone inside his room. The lantern rested quietly on the stool. He walked past it. He sat on the bed. No, he would not light it. He would sleep normally. He lay down and closed his eyes. 5 minutes passed. 10. Sleep refused to come. An anxious thought burrowed into his mind. What if the money disappears tomorrow? What if tonight is the price for keeping everything? Another thought followed. You survived twice. You can survive again. His breathing quickened. Greed and fear wrapped themselves together until he could no longer tell one from the other. With trembling hands, he reached for the matchbox. The flame touched the wick. Golden light flooded the room. He extinguished it immediately. Darkness swallowed everything. The moment his eyelids closed, the world vanished. Instead of awakening inside the familiar corridor, Kalu landed hard on freezing concrete. The impact drove the air from his lungs. He pushed himself upright. Silence. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing. For one hopeful second, he believed the nightmare had ended. Then, a rusty metal door somewhere above him slowly creaked open. A whisper drifted through the darkness. Run! It wasn't the monster's voice. It sounded human, desperate, terrified. Then the corridor exploded with the now familiar rhythm. Thump, drag, thump, drag. Only this time, it came from 2 different directions. The corridors no longer resembled a place built by human hands. The grey concrete had begun to change. Long cracks spread across the walls like veins beneath old skin, pulsing faintly with a dull golden glow. Rusted doors lined both sides of the passage, each marked with strange symbols that seemed to shift whenever Kalu tried to focus on them. The freezing air no longer carried only the smell of wet earth and iron. It carried whispers, hundreds of them. Some prayed, some cried, some laughed, others simply repeated the same sentence over and over until the words dissolved into meaningless echoes. Kalu's heart pounded as he turned in slow circles. There was no sign of the faceless hunter, only silence. For the first time since entering the nightmare, he considered not running. A distant voice cut through the darkness. Don't stand still. It sounded human, weak, urgent. Kalu followed the voice until he reached a narrow opening between 2 cracked walls. Inside crouched a man whose beard reached his chest. His clothes looked decades old, stained with dust and dried mud. Deep scratches covered his arms. Around one ankle hung a broken chain attached to nothing at all. The stranger stared at Kalu with hollow eyes. "You lit it," the man whispered. Kalu swallowed. "What is this place?" The old man gave a humorless smile. "That was my first question too. You've been here before." "I've been here for longer than I can remember." Kalu shook his head. "No, that's impossible. Every morning I wake up." The man's smile faded. "You wake because it allows you to." Those words settled over Kalu like cold rain. "What do you mean?" "The first nights are gifts. It wants your fear to grow. Fear feeds hope. Hope keeps you lighting the lantern." Before Kalu could ask another question, every whisper inside the maze stopped. The silence was absolute.
The old man's expression changed instantly. His eyes widened. "Run!" The first impact echoed somewhere beyond the walls. Thump. Another answered from a different direction. Thump. Then another and another. The sound no longer belonged to a single pursuer. It was everywhere. Kalu backed away. "How many are there?" The old man did not answer. He simply closed his eyes. Golden cracks spread rapidly beneath his skin. Tiny streams of light escaped through his fingertips. "No!" The old man's body began to crumble, not into dust, into glowing ash. Within seconds, he vanished completely, leaving only a faint golden outline on the floor where he had been sitting. Kalu stumbled backwards in horror. The whispers returned all at once. This time, they were speaking directly to him. "Don't trust your eyes. Never answer your name. Don't open the red doors. Keep moving. It's learning you." The last sentence echoed longest. "It's learning you." Kalu turned and ran. The maze had changed again. The corridors bent in impossible directions. Staircases climbed into darkness before folding back into the floor. As he sprinted past one of them, someone knocked from inside. 3 slow knocks. Then a woman's voice. "Kalu?" He froze. It was his mother's voice. Soft, gentle, exactly as he had remembered hearing it whenever she called him home as a child. "My son." His legs refused to move. Another knock. "I'm frightened." His hand drifted towards the handle. Then he remembered the warning. Never answer your name. Never open the red doors. The door was painted deep crimson. Kalu stepped away. Instantly, the comforting voice transformed into something unnatural. "You ungrateful boy!" The words emerged through dozens of overlapping voices. "You chose money. You chose yourself. You deserve to stay." The door began shaking violently. Something heavy slammed against it from the inside. Wood splintered, metal screamed, and Kalu fled. His breathing grew ragged. His chest burned. The maze seemed to anticipate every turn before he made it. Every escape route narrowed. Every corridor ended in another impossible choice. Then he noticed figures standing perfectly still along the walls. At first, he mistook them for statues. As he drew closer, he realized they were people, men and women, even a teenager no older than 16. Each stood motionless with their eyes open. Their skin had turned pale like candle wax. Golden cracks spread across their faces, necks and hands. Yet they were still alive. Their eyes followed him. One of them blinked. A woman barely moved her lips. "It hurts." Another whispered, "I forgot my children's faces." An elderly man murmured, "Don't become part of the walls." Kalu wanted to help them. He reached towards the nearest victim. The moment his fingers came within inches of hers, every trapped person turned their heads in perfect unison, their mouths opened together. "It's behind you." The words exploded through the corridor. A freezing pressure settled across Kalu's shoulders. He did not need to look. He already knew. Something breathed once, slowly, patiently, closer than ever before. Instead of running immediately, Kalu forced himself to think. Every previous night he had fled in blind panic. Every previous night the hunter had gained ground. Perhaps the maze had rules. Perhaps fear itself was the trap. He took one careful step forward instead of sprinting. The breathing behind him paused. Another step, the pressure eased slightly. Hope flickered. Then he made the mistake of glancing over his shoulder. The faceless being was no longer walking. It stood less than 2 arms length away. Its featureless face reflected no anger, no joy, no hatred, only endless hunger. Without moving its
The
mouth,
old rules
his
do
voice
not
filled
apply
the
here
corridor.
anymore.
"I no longer
Your
need
physical
the
life
lantern."
belongs
Kalu's
entirely
blood
to us
turned to
now.
ice. The door is open. The walls shuddered violently. Golden light poured through every crack. The trapped victims began screaming, not in pain, in warning. "Wake up!"
The corridor collapsed beneath Kalu's feet. He fell through blinding light and awoke on the floor of his room before sunrise. His lungs heaved. His hands trembled uncontrollably. For several seconds, he simply stared at the ceiling, grateful to be alive. Then he noticed something impossible. Concrete dust covered his bare feet. There were fresh scratches across his palms, and beside his mattress, the golden lantern was already lit. No matchbox lay nearby. No one else was in the room. The small golden flame burned without flickering, as though it had been waiting for him to wake.
Kalu thought he was awake. For several seconds, he lay frozen on the floor of his room, staring at the ceiling while the golden lantern burned silently beside him. The concrete dust on his feet was real. The scratches on his palms were real. Everything around him looked exactly as it should. Then the lantern flickered. Kalu slowly turned his head. The golden flame bent sideways, even though there was no wind. Once, twice. Then the room went completely silent. The sounds of the compound disappeared. No footsteps, no voices, no distant generators, not even the sound of his own breathing. Kalu's stomach dropped. No! The lantern suddenly flared. The walls of his room stretched outward, the peeling cream paint dissolving into endless gray concrete. His mattress vanished beneath him. The wooden stool disappeared. The ceiling opened into darkness. Kalu tried to crawl away. He couldn't move. The transition was instantaneous. There was no breath of air, no corridor, and no chance to run. Kalu materialized directly onto freezing wet concrete, and before he could even regain his balance, cold skeletal fingers locked around his throat. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The entity didn't chase him this time. The chase was over. It loomed directly above him, its towering, shifting mass blotting out every inch of the pale, suffocating void. Where its face should have been, smooth, blank skin stared back at him, so close that Kalu could see tiny shadows moving beneath its surface. For the first time, Kalu understood. It had never needed to catch him quickly. It had been teaching him to run. Every nightmare, every narrow escape, every morning he woke believing he had survived, the fear had been the payment. The entity leaned closer. A low, rattling breath filled the darkness. Kalu felt his strength draining away, not like a wound, but like something invisible was being pulled from the deepest parts of him. His memories became distant. His thoughts began to blur. Even the faces of the people he loved seemed to slip further away. And then the truth became clear. The entity wasn't simply haunting the lantern. It was bound to it. The lantern was a doorway, and every time Kalu lit it, he entered a bargain he never understood. The money in the waking world wasn't luck, it was payment. Every successful sale, every unexpected bank alert, every opportunity that appeared from nowhere had been buying something from him. His fear, his memories, his strength, and eventually his life. Kalu's eyes widened as the realization settled over him. He had spent every day celebrating the money. He had never stopped to ask what the money was costing him. The entity's blank face drew closer. Kalu tried to pull away, but there was nowhere left to run. The golden light surrounding them grew brighter. His thoughts became quieter. The last thing Kalu remembered was the sound of the familiar rhythm echoing through the darkness. Thump, drag, thump, drag. Then everything went dark. The morning sun rose over Lagos, blazing down with its usual relentless fury upon the corrugated iron roofs of Mushin. The air outside Kalu's compound was thick with the familiar morning symphony, the roar of two-stroke commercial motorcycles, the shouts of weary commuters, and the blaring generators coughing into life. Inside Kalu's room, however, there was a profound, unnatural silence. The golden lantern sat untouched on the wooden bedside stool, its metallic surface gleaming with a chilling, arrogant perfection. Its golden brass was smooth, flawless, and as bright as fresh coins. The wick was completely dry, cold to the touch, and free of any ash. On the thin foam mattress lay Callum. His eyes were wide open, locked in a permanent hollow stare directed at the peeling cream ceiling. His face was frozen in an expression of terror, his jaw slack as if caught mid-scream. Yet there was not a single drop of sweat on his skin, nor any sign of a struggle. His body was unnaturally cold and completely still. By mid-afternoon, the door to his room was pounded open by an angry landlord and two impatient business clients clutching cash orders for the day's market transactions. They stopped dead in their tracks at the threshold. There was no foul play, no signs of a break-in, and no missing valuables. The room was neat, quiet, and dominated solely by the gleaming golden lantern resting by the bed. The clients, staring at the lifeless trader and then at the glowing brass object, felt a sudden freezing draft sweep through the room, a draft that smelled faintly of wet earth and ancient iron. Within an hour, the news spread through the compound and down to the bustling stalls of Alaba and Ladepo. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Kalu was gone. The trader who had become wealthy almost overnight was dead. By evening, as the chaos of the Lagos night market began to swell once more under the flashing counterfeit bulbs, the golden lantern vanished from the room. No one saw who took it. Some said the landlord threw it away in fear. Others whispered that a greedy apprentice, blinded by rumors of Kalu's sudden wealth, slipped into the room and pocketed the prize before the police arrived. Deep at the edge of the market, far from the generators and the blaring horns, an old woman sat hunched on a woven mat surrounded by broken plastic toys and faded wrappers. Beside her, gleaming with an unnatural, hypnotic golden sheen, sat the heavy brass lantern. She did not look at it. She simply waited quietly in the darkness, waiting for the next bargain hunter to walk by.